So the background of this video is going to look a little bit different. I'm recording this video in my room, working 2 jobs and about 70 hours a week. Hasn't been easy on my body. I'm just feeling complete shit, so I barely have enough energy to even go outside. But the topic I'm going to cover is pretty simple, I think. So a lot of people have been asking me about this divorce rate in China. What the hell is going on? So yeah, 2019, 4.7 million divorces. How did China go from virtually no divorces to over 50% divorce rate? And I mentioned in previous videos that the divorce rate in northeastern China is about 60%. But however, I did show this number. So in urban areas, in all these Chinese cities, the divorce rate is roughly 60%. But in my hometown in northeastern China, in the city of Jilin and in Changchun, so the divorce rate is actually 71.4%. Yes, 71.4%. And I can tell you guys this much, the remaining 28.6% that do stay married, they're all absolutely miserable. And I mentioned this video, I got a lot of tags for this, in previous videos I talk about the white culture. Well, I'm sorry to say, white people came up with this thing called the DINKs, dual income, no kids, or dual income, no children. I'll tell you guys why that is cancer for society. In order to have a strong nuclear family, in order to build a strong civilization, here's one thing I will say. I mean, it's 100% okay if you don't want to get married, if you don't want to have children. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So, however, first of all, I mentioned this before, there's no such thing as a gay marriage, okay? And not just that, there's no such thing as a gay marriage, there's no such thing as a lesbian marriage, and there's no such thing as a childless marriage. So I'll tell you guys exactly why. So how come in Chinese cities, the divorce rate is roughly 60%? In my hometown, it's very high, 71.4%. So how come is it in rural areas, right? If you go to a small village of 20,000 people, how come when you go to the countryside, yes, there are divorces, but it's roughly 20%. Now, if I ask you guys this question, because here's one thing that is also true. So in China, 73% of divorces are filed by women. Now, this number is pretty typical when you compare to Western countries. If you guys were presented with the opportunity, if you could marry a Chinese girl from the city versus a Chinese girl from the village, what would you choose? Obviously, well, it was up to me. I would never marry a Chinese girl from the city. I mean, 60% divorce rate versus 20% divorce rate. I tell you guys why the number one reason why that is happening. It's because well, I did mention a lot about, the population collapse, right? Same thing's happening to China. China has one of the lowest birth rates in the world. So the birth rate in China is about 1 children per woman. I think it's about 1 exactly, which is very bad because the replacement level is 2.1. However, this varies greatly depending on where you live. Basically, the bigger the city you live in, the less likely you're going to have children. So here are some crazy numbers. For example, if you look at the capital, 22 million people, right, of Beijing. What do you guys think is the fertility rate in the city of Beijing, in China's capital, 22 million people? 0.6 children per woman. Yes, 0.6. And if you look at the country currently that holds the world record for the lowest birth rate in the world, it's South Korea. So in the capital of South Korea, the city of Seoul, so the fertility rate is 0.53 children per woman. And what about if you look at my mom's hometown of Chengdu, another city of 22 million people? Once again, the fertility rate is 0.6 children per woman. If you look at China's wealthiest city with the highest GDP, city of Shanghai, what do you guys think is the fertility rate? Once again, 0.6 children per woman. What about a futuristic high-tech megacity like Shenzhen? What about Hong Kong? Well, in Shenzhen and Hong Kong, the fertility rate is about 0.75 children per woman. These are staggeringly low numbers. So if you're wondering how come if all of these mega cities in China, if they're all between 0.6 to 0.7, how did China get to an average of 1 children per woman? Well, it's because once again, it's the rural countryside. The folks that live in the countryside are way more likely to have children. And this is what I mean by the nuclear family. It's so important to have children. Things are absolute cancer to any society. And the reason why there are so many divorces in major cities is because for a lot of these couples, the reason why they get divorced is because it's very simple, because there's no children involved. Everything changes your life as soon as you have a kid. And generally speaking, once again, I understand, obviously, my mom has been divorced 6 times, about to divorce for the 7th time. And my sister, she's had 2 kids and she's been divorced 3 times, about 4 times. Yes, okay, my family is batshit crazy, but even by modern 2025 standards, that is a very small percentage of the population that is actually that, batshit insane. So the vast majority of the people, yes, they do have problems, but I think the vast majority of the people, they're actually willing to sit down and they're willing to sort things out. Because every time a couple get into an argument, right, so if there's no children involved, yeah, both sides, right, I'm not trying to just pinpoint the blame on women or just pinpoint the blame on men. Both sides have to be equally responsible, because I've personally seen so many divorces in my family, absolutely outrageous, right? So in any divorce, in any breakup of a relationship, it is never, 0 or 100 when it comes to, the responsibilities, right? Sometimes, yeah, sure, it's 25 and 75%, but I would say most of the time it's 50-50. Both spouses are at fault for, bringing their relationship to a catastrophic end, for completely destroying their marriage. But however, right, let's say, if at any point, right, where things are just getting overwhelming, whether if it's at work or at school or your personal life, and you're about to get into an explosive argument, then you remember, okay, I got a 5-year-old daughter and I have a 4-year-old son. And they want to look up to me. I have to become a good model citizen. Because if I don't set a good example for my children, if I don't teach them about building their moral values, building the contents of their character, they're going to grow up to be hosts. They're going to grow up to be OnlyFans content creators. They're going to be growing up to be gangsters and career criminals. So, but however, if there are no children involved in your marriage or relationship, yeah, I mean, yeah, the couple is absolutely going to lash out at each other, and they couldn't care less about the consequences, because they know that, there are no witnesses. There's nobody's watching them. They can do whatever the hell they want to. So if you're wondering, yeah, basically, how can there be so many divorces in China, right? So from 2010 to 2019, China registered 40 million divorces. Out of those 40 million, over 30 million are filed by women. It gets very complicated when there's a child or when there's custody involved. For example, if you live in the countryside, if you're wondering, so right now in China, in the countryside, in rural China, the fertility rate, once again, is about 1.5 children per woman. That's very interesting. So I did mention, right, so China, right, Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu, 0.6. If you look at Hong Kong, Shenzhen, about 0.75. So yeah, here comes another shocking statistic. If you live in one of these Chinese mega cities, so basically, like I mentioned, Hong Kong, Beijing, Shanghai, Wuhan, Chongqing. So any of these mega cities in China with more than 10 million people, right? You think about all of these fine, beautiful Chinese women, all of these perfect steamed snow rice bunnies. Well, roughly 80% of Chinese women living in these mega cities with a population of 10 million or more will never ever become mothers. Remember that. 80% of Chinese women living in mega cities with over 10 million people will never ever procreate. That is just the reality. So you guys tell me, is life in the city better, or is life in the rural countryside better? So that's a very shocking number. That is why in Chinese cities, the average divorce rate is 60%, right? So, and in my hometown, it's 71.4%. So yeah, I did look this up. My hometown actually has the second highest divorce rate in China. Number one is city of Tianjin, which is right beside the capital of Beijing. So Tianjin has a divorce rate of 72.5%. Yeah, that's why there's so many divorces, because the vast majority of these women, they do not have children. So oftentimes, so what happens is that these miserable Chinese women, they will force their husbands to go down to the divorce court, and they have a couple of photos taken, and they will get their divorce certificate, and they will have it stamped. And the fee is very, very cheap. If it's a non-contested divorce, you're looking at maybe like $100 to get your divorce certificate. So you take a photo, you get it stamped, you pay $100, and that's it. Your marriage is over. So this is what I mean. There's no such thing as a childless marriage. The only reason why a young couple today, okay, anywhere in the world, the only reason why you should be getting married is for the purpose of procreation. And of course, I understand infertility is very common in 2025. It's very common in Western countries, very common in many Asian countries as well. And I am so sorry if you're a couple that is trying to have children, but you just cannot. Those are the extreme rare exceptions. You're looking at maybe 2 or 3% of the marriages. Once again, right, I'm not against you guys shacking up without getting married. There's nothing wrong with, just being a long-term committed relationship or being a common law. But once again, there's no such thing as having children out of wedlock. That is why it's 100% illegal in China, because if you have children without getting married, there's a 90 to 95% chance that that child is going to be raised by a single mother. You guys have seen all the statistics, and nothing good happens when a child is being raised by a single mother. That is why, if you guys do not want to have children, do not get married. It's very simple. But if you choose to get married, then that is the sole purpose of your marriage, is that you must procreate. And many of you guys might think that's controversial, doesn't make any sense. How can you force this onto people? Well, nobody's forcing you to get married, and you have to realize there's a problem. The fact that the divorce rate in the Chinese cities is at 60% now. In my hometown, Jilin, it's 71.4%. In the city of Harbin, it's 69.5%. In Shenyang, it's 68.2%. Once again, I need to emphasize on this. 80% of Chinese women living in mega cities with a population of 10 million or more will never ever become mothers. So all of this feminist liberal movement, the female sexual liberation, has this really benefited any woman? Because all of these women who end up becoming leftover women, who end up becoming cat parents, the vast majority of them, they're absolutely miserable. Just look at the happiness scale for women. Women are more depressed, women are more miserable than ever before. How many liberal leftist women have you guys seen in these Western countries? How many of them are genuinely happy? Women who end up never getting married and never having children, the vast majority of them will be taking antidepressants for the entirety of the second half of their lives. Once again, right, in quick summary, I don't want to drag this video on for too long. It's very simple. The reason why, they're in rural China, the divorce rate is only 20% because, well, the fertility rate in rural China is about 1.5 children for women. The vast majority of the time, right, if a couple of country folks in China, if they get married, yes, they will have children. So that is the vast majority of the time. And if a couple has a children, the chances of that Chinese woman or the Chinese man filing for divorce will go down by 70, 80, 90%. It will go down significantly because oftentimes, right, it comes down to, both spouses willing to work out their marriage, right? If there's a children involved, it is extremely unlikely that either spouse will ever file for divorce. They will do everything they can to keep their nuclear family intact. They will sacrifice everything for the future of their children. They will do everything in their power to make sure that their children will grow up in a two-parent household. Now, it's very different, for example, if you live in Chengdu or Beijing or Shanghai, where the fertility rate is 0.6 children per woman. Keep in mind, some of these women, right, even in 2025, they're still having 2, 3, or even 4 children in some extreme cases. So this means that I would say probably, yeah, you're looking at 70, 80% of these modern marriages in these Chinese mega cities. They're childless marriages. These Chinese parents, they're all DINKs. And by the way, I'm sorry to say, white people started this movement, and it's absolutely cancer. That's why, the divorce rate has been so high in Western countries, because in so many of these marriages, when there's no children, when there's no custody, there's no child support involved, it's very, very easy to get a divorce. And at that point, the marriage becomes a joke, right? Imagine just a Chinese couple going to the divorce court. You just take a picture, and you get your certificate, you get it stamped. That's it. That's it, and you pay $100. So, if you can get rid of your marriage that easily, how can you call that a marriage? I mean, it's an absolute 100% joke. At this point, I don't even think it should be called a divorce. At best, it's an annulment, because your marriage is 100% annulled. It's a 100% joke to you. So if the fertility rate in Chinese cities was actually much higher, never mind at the replacement level, I don't think that's going to ever happen, right? So China is definitely on course for a population collapse, just like many Western countries. So, but let's say if the numbers were reversed, let's say in the Chinese megacities, the fertility rate was actually 1.5 children per woman. Let's say, 80% of these married women in these megacities in China, if they all had at least one kid, and let's say if, the cards were reversed, but let's say in rural China, in these small villages, in these small towns of 10, 20, 30,000 people, the 80% of the married couples, they're DINKs, they don't plan on having children. Now I can guarantee you guys that the numbers will be flipped. What I mean is that, so in rural China, you will see a 60% divorce rate, whereas in the urban areas, in the megacities, the divorce rate will only be 20%. Once again, right, so Nobody's forcing you to get married, right? Unless you live in one of those third world countries, and I'm so sorry if you're being forcefully arranged into one of those terrible abusive marriages. If you do not plan on getting married, then do not have children. However, if you do choose the path of marriage, once again, there's no such thing as a gay marriage. There's no such thing as a lesbian marriage. There's no such thing as a DINK marriage. The sole purpose of a marriage is to procreate and pass along your bloodline. Nothing else will ever be more important than that. Just remember. And you guys might be thinking, oh, that kind of thinking is wrong. No. The kind of thinking by these DINKs is exactly what is wrong with modern society. That's why there are tens and millions of divorces that's happening worldwide to so many different countries. Once again, right, you can look at the breakdown of every single statistic of all the divorces that's been happening worldwide. Think about countries like Russia and Ukraine. I'm talking about before the war, that is. So, yeah, why are there so many divorces in Russia and Ukraine? Just look at their birth rate. Russia and Ukraine, they also have some of the lowest birth rates in the world, right? Once again, if a couple has children, the chances of either spouses filing for divorce will go down by 70, 80, 90, or even 95%. However, if this is a childless marriage, if both spouses are DINKs, then the divorce rate will skyrocket like this because both spouses are simply not going to care because there's no children involved. So, for all of you guys who are looking for a solution, who are looking for a way forward to solving this crisis, I have just laid out the two paths for you. You can either choose to stay single for life, never get married, or never procreate. Once again, for both man and woman, nothing wrong with that. Times have changed. Or if you do choose the path of marriage, then you absolutely must have children. That is the only way we can solve the current divorce epidemic worldwide. Thank you guys so much for clicking on this video and watching all the way until the end. I will come back to this topic.